She walked into the room already knowing she did not deserve to be there. Not because she lacked talent, not because she lacked preparation, not because anyone had told her she was unwelcome. She walked in knowing something far worse than any of those things. She walked in knowing that the woman who deserved this role more than anyone in the world was not there. And the reason that woman was not there had nothing to do with ability, nothing to do with artistry, nothing to do with years of sacrifice. It had to do with one man's decision, one man's fear, one man's definition of what a name was worth, and Audrey Hepburn was about to carry that weight for the next 2 years of her life. Warner Brothers Studios, Burbank, California. The autumn of 1963. The most expensive and anticipated musical film in Hollywood history is in production. My Fair Lady. Rights purchased for $5.5 million, a figure that had never been paid for any intellectual property before. Cecil Beaton designing 1,500 costumes. George Cukor directing. Rex Harrison reprising the role of Professor Henry Higgins. And in the role of Eliza Doolittle, a woman who had played that exact role on Broadway for more than 2,000 performances. A woman whose voice had been described by critics as the finest instrument in American musical theater. A woman who knew every note, every breath, every pause of this character so deeply that she had become the character in the minds of an entire generation. That woman's name was Julie Andrews. She was not there. Instead, there was Audrey Hepburn, 5 feet 7 inches, 110 pounds, Academy Award winner, the most recognizable face in Hollywood, Roman Holiday, Sabrina, Breakfast at Tiffany's, Shoe Raid, a woman who had never failed at the box office, never delivered a film that did not earn back its investment. A woman who carried the title of the most bankable actress in the world with a kind of effortless grace that made everyone around her feel, somehow, that everything would be fine. But everything was not fine, and Audrey knew it. Jack L. Warner had purchased the rights to My Fair Lady in February of 1962. The film had to be a massive, culture-defining, record-breaking commercial success. He had paid $5.5 million for the rights alone. Production costs would eventually reach $17 million. Jack Warner was not making art. Jack Warner was making an investment, and investments required certainty. Julie Andrews was uncertain. She had played Eliza Doolittle on Broadway for 6 years. She had originated the role. She had won a Tony Award for it. Every critic in New York had called her performance one of the finest stage achievements of the decade. But Julie Andrews had never made a film. In Jack Warner's words, she was a Broadway name, known primarily to those who saw the play. In cities across America and around the world, her name meant nothing, because those people had never heard her. Audrey Hepburn's face, on the other hand, meant everything. So Warner made the call. He wanted Audrey. The offer was clear. The money was significant. The role was Eliza Doolittle, arguably the most coveted female part in the history of musical theater. And Audrey Hepburn, sitting in her Swiss home, heard the offer and said something that stunned the man on the other end of the phone. She said no. Not just no. She said Julie Andrews should play this role. She said Andrews had earned it, had lived it, had made it what it was. She said she did not think it was right for her to take it. The studio executive on the phone had prepared for negotiations, for financial discussions, for scheduling conflicts. He had not prepared for this. He had not prepared for a major Hollywood star to look at a $17 million production and say it belonged to someone else. He told her the truth. If Audrey declined, the role would not go to Andrews. It would go to another film actress. Andrews was not in consideration for the film version under any circumstances. Audrey was silent for a long moment. Then she said she would think about it. But here is what makes this story different from any other casting story. The real conflict had not even begun yet. What happened in those months of preparation and filming and silence revealed something about Audrey Hepburn that no role she ever played could have revealed. It revealed what she was made of when the cameras were off and the lights were down and no one was watching. And what she was made of left everyone who witnessed it without words. Audrey accepted the role. The announcement was made, Hollywood celebrated, Jack Warner celebrated, and somewhere in New York, Julie Andrews, who had just been told by Walt Disney that he wanted her for a film about a magical English nanny, quietly turned a page and kept moving forward. But Audrey did not celebrate. From the first day of rehearsals, Audrey threw herself into preparation with an intensity that surprised even the people who knew her well. She hired a vocal coach. She worked 6 days a week on the songs. She arrived before anyone else and left after everyone. The role demanded a vocal range that was honestly beyond what Audrey had. She knew that, but she refused to let that stop her. She was going to earn this. She was going to give this character everything she had. By the time filming began, Audrey had lost 8 pounds. The combination of relentless rehearsal schedules and the strain in her personal life had carved exhaustion into her face that the makeup team spent hours each morning covering. Rex Harrison, who had given up smoking, found Audrey's 3-packs-a-day habit unbearable. They maintained the professional surface the work required. But the surface was thin, and then the music director walked into the room. It happened on an ordinary morning. Audrey was in the makeup chair, sitting in that strange suspended state between private person and public performance, watching her own face be rearranged into someone else's. The music director came in. He did not look comfortable. He stood near the door. He told her they had reviewed the vocal recordings. He told her that her voice, while beautiful in its way, lacked the power and range that the role demanded in certain songs. He told her that the majority of her singing would need to be dubbed. Audrey put down the pencil she had been holding. She looked at the music director. Then she looked at herself in the mirror. Then she stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She did not say a single word. She simply stood up and walked out of the room. The door closed behind her. Nobody moved for several seconds. What nobody knew in that moment was that Audrey Hepburn would have refused this role from the beginning if she had known. That is not speculation. That is something she said herself, in her own words, recorded and documented. She had been led to believe that some high notes might require help. She had not been told that 90% of her vocal performance would be removed. She had spent months preparing. She had damaged her health. And now she was being told that almost none of it would survive into the finished film. That was the moment Audrey Hepburn stopped being a person doing a job and became something else entirely. Something harder, something quieter, something that would take years to fully understand. She came back to the set. She did not discuss it. She did not make demands. She came back to the makeup chair, sat down, and let the morning begin again. But the woman sitting in that chair was different than the woman who had walked out. Marni Nixon arrived on the Warner Brothers lot without fanfare. She was not a household name. She was something Hollywood called a ghost singer, a voice that appeared in films without credit, that gave sound to faces that could not produce it themselves. She had voiced Deborah Kerr in The King and I. She had voiced Natalie Wood in West Side Story. Now she would voice Audrey Hepburn, two women sharing a single character, one providing the body and face, one providing the voice. When Audrey and Marni met for the first time, there was a silence that both of them later described as deeply uncomfortable. What do you say to the person who is replacing the most personal instrument you possess? Audrey extended her hand. She said, I have heard you sing. You have a beautiful voice. That was all, but it was enough. Marni Nixon, in interviews given decades later, always returned to that moment. She expected coldness. She expected the defensiveness of someone whose territory had been invaded. Instead, she got something she had not expected from one of the most famous women in the world. The grace of a person who has chosen, in a moment of pain, to be generous anyway. Filming continued through the autumn and into the winter. Director George Cukor halted production for a full week when Audrey fell genuinely ill, her body surrendering to the demands made on it. When she returned, she looked thinner, but she returned. She always returned. And here is what no one talks about when they tell the story of My Fair Lady. While all of this was happening, while Audrey was losing weight and having her voice replaced and holding herself together through a production that was grinding her down, she never once said a critical word about Julie Andrews. Not one. Not to the press. Not to colleagues. Not in any letter or diary entry that has been made public. In an industry that ran on gossip and the strategic undermining of rivals, Audrey Hepburn maintained absolute silence about the woman whose shadow she was working in. That silence said more than any statement could have. The film premiered at the Criterion Theater in New York on October 21, 1964. Critics praised it lavishly. Cecil Beaton's costumes were declared masterpieces. Rex Harrison's performance was called definitive. Audrey's portrayal of Eliza was described, in review after review, as luminous, touching, perfectly calibrated to the screen. What the reviews did not discuss was whose voice was coming out of her mouth for 90% of the running time. But the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences noticed. The nominations were announced in February of 1965. My Fair Lady received 12 nominations. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor for Rex Harrison, Cinematography, Art Direction, Costume Design, Sound, Film Editing. Best Actress for Audrey Hepburn. That nomination did not exist. In a film that received 12 Academy Award nominations, the woman who appeared in virtually every frame, who had carried the production through illness and personal crisis, and the knowledge that her own voice had been taken from her, was not considered for Best Actress. The response from Warner Brothers was immediate and furious. Director George Cukor made public statements expressing his outrage. Trade publications ran editorials about the injustice. The Academy had made one of the most striking omissions in the history of the award. Audrey said nothing. She accepted the Academy's invitation to present the Best Actor award that evening. She appeared at the ceremony in a Givenchy gown that stopped conversation in every room she entered. She smiled. She was gracious. She was, as always, precisely and completely Audrey Hepburn. And Julie Andrews, in the same year with her first film role in a Walt Disney production about a magical nanny, received a Best Actress nomination. The night of the 37th Academy Awards was April 5, 1965. Rex Harrison won Best Actor. He walked to the podium. He held his Oscar. He looked out at the audience, and in his acceptance speech, he dedicated the award to his two fair ladies, Audrey Hepburn, who had played Eliza in the film, and Julie Andrews, who had played Eliza on the stage. Two women, one award, one man's generosity large enough to acknowledge both. Audrey was in the audience. She smiled. She applauded. The cameras found her face, and what they captured was not bitterness or relief or complicated emotion. What they captured was simple, genuine warmth. And then the Best Actress Award was announced. Julie Andrews, Mary Poppins. Andrews walked to the stage. She accepted the Oscar. She thanked Walt Disney. She thanked her co-stars. And then, with a smile that carried a precision that only someone who had lived the previous 2 years could fully appreciate, she said, "I would like to thank a man who made all of this possible, Mr. Jack Warner." The audience laughed. Andrews smiled. And the man who had decided that Julie Andrews was not famous enough to carry a $17 million film sat somewhere in that room and understood exactly what had just happened. After the ceremony, in the crowded lobby, journalists surrounded Audrey. They wanted the reaction. They wanted the quote about the snub, about the injustice, about what it felt like to watch the woman who should have had her role win the award that should have been hers. Audrey looked at the reporter. She considered the question. And then she said this: "Julie deserved her Oscar for Mary Poppins, but she also deserved to be in My Fair Lady. And perhaps the Oscar she won tonight was for both." The reporter wrote it down. The room around her went quiet for a moment. And then someone started talking again, as rooms always do. And the moment passed into the permanent record of a night that Hollywood has never quite stopped arguing about. But something else happened that night. Something smaller. Something that was not recorded by any journalist or captured by any camera. After the ceremony, in a corridor near the exit, Audrey Hepburn and Julie Andrews found themselves standing within a few feet of each other. Andrews later described what happened. Audrey looked at her, not with the careful neutrality of professional courtesy, with something more direct than that. She said, "You were always Eliza. Tonight, the right person won." Andrews did not know what to say. She said thank you, quietly. Audrey nodded and moved toward the exit. That was it. No embrace, no dramatic declaration, 2 minutes, maybe less. And yet that exchange began something. A correspondence, then visits, then what both women's biographers eventually described as a genuine and lasting friendship that continued until Audrey's death. Audrey's son, Luca Dotti, confirmed that Julie Andrews was a frequent presence in the later years of Audrey's life. That she came to the house, that they talked, not about films or awards or the industry, but about ordinary things, children, gardens, quiet afternoons. My Fair Lady won 8 Academy Awards that night. Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Cinematography, Art Direction, Costume Design, Sound, Adapted Score. Marni Nixon's name was not mentioned in any acceptance speech. The woman whose voice had carried Eliza Doolittle through the songs of the most celebrated musical film of the decade went home without acknowledgement. The Academy did not credit ghost singers. Marni Nixon had given the same gift to 3 of the most iconic musical performances in Hollywood history, and received, in exchange, professional anonymity so complete that most audiences watching those films today still do not know she existed. When Audrey learned that a journalist was writing about the dubbing and planned to reveal the extent of Nixon's contribution, she was asked how she felt about the story being told. She said, "Tell it. Marni Nixon should be known. What she did was extraordinary. The fact that she was not credited is a failure of this industry, not of her." Audrey Hepburn never made another musical. She had said, after My Fair Lady, that she would not accept a musical role unless she could perform her own vocals. That was not a statement of pride. That was a statement of integrity. She was telling the industry, "I will not lend my face to a voice that is not mine without transparency." She made the decision because it was the honest thing to do. In interviews in the late 1980s, journalists sometimes brought up My Fair Lady. Audrey answered these questions with the same calm she brought to everything else. She said, "I learned things making that film that I could not have learned anywhere else. I learned the difference between what I could do and what I wished I could do. I learned that the gap between those two things is not a failure. It is simply information. And I learned that the woman who was supposed to be in that role went on to do something so extraordinary that the whole question became irrelevant." She was asked, "Do you have any regrets about taking the role?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I regret that Julie was not in it. That was always my regret. Not my performance, not the dubbing, not the nomination that did not come. I regret that the decision was made before I could stop it. I tried to stop it. I was told it would not matter, that the role would go to someone else regardless. So I did what I could with what I had. I hope I did it justice. But Julie was always Eliza." Audrey Hepburn died on January 20th, 1993. She was 63 years old. Julie Andrews was among those who spoke publicly about her loss. She said, "Audrey showed us what it meant to carry yourself with genuine dignity. Not performed dignity. Not the kind you put on for cameras. The kind that stays when the cameras are off and the lights are down and someone is asking you to be less than you are. She never was. In 30 years, I never once saw her be less than what she was." What he could not calculate, what no studio executive has ever been able to calculate, is what authenticity is worth. What it is worth when a woman stands in a corridor after the most complicated evening of her professional life and tells another woman the honest thing. What it is worth when a person, in the midst of her own loss, looks outward instead of inward. This story is about a woman who tried to give the role away, who was told she could not, who took it anyway and worked until her health gave out, who met the woman replacing her voice and offered her nothing but kindness, who sat in the audience the night the Oscar went to someone else and applauded, who told the world the right person had won, who refused to make another musical rather than pretend, who said, not once, but many times, across many years, 7 words that cost her everything to mean. She was always Eliza. That is what Audrey Hepburn was made of, and 60 years later, it is still the most remarkable thing about that story. Not the film, not the Oscars, not the controversy. The fact that she said it, the fact that she meant it, the fact that she kept saying it until the end of her life, without bitterness, without qualification, without asking for anything in return. She was always Eliza. 7 words. True, costly, unnecessary, exactly right. And Julie Andrews, who is still alive, still carries them. Every week, one moment from Audrey Hepburn's life. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.